The Wonderful World of Darklords. Report 23. Camp Green Lake. The transition from the mists to Camp Green Lake was one of the most sudden I have ever experienced. The tendrils of fog abruptly became a heat shimmer so dry that I could almost feel the moisture being sucked out through my pores. When I looked behind me, craning my neck to see around the supply wagon that carried me, all I saw was more of that same heat shimmer. Nothing so cool and damp as mist could hope to endure in Camp Green Lake. As the wagon made its way toward the prison complex at the center of the desert, it was impossible not to notice the most striking feature of Camp Green Lake: the holes. At first there were only a few of them, each roughly the size of a short human or a tall dwarf, clustered together in groups of 5 to 8. As we drew closer, more and more holes riddled the landscape, until the horse had to pick its way along a clearly marked path so the hardpan would not crumble under its hooves and pitch us into a cavity. The wagon driver informed me that this reflected the philosophy of Camp Green Lake. If you take a criminal and make them dig a hole all day in the hot sun, it turns them into a productive citizen. I initially wrote this off as an excuse for an inventive form of torture. However, it eventually became clear that there was another purpose to the digging. A generations-old obsession that had nothing to do with the prisoners and everything to do with their warden.
Welcome to Wonderful World of Darklords. I'm Tom.
I'm Rachel.
And we're discussing how to convert Disney movies to Ravenloft domains of dread, because if you take a bad gamer and make them podcast all day in a messy living room, it turns them into a good gamer.
Along the way, we'll look at the Darklord, the domain itself, and some plot hooks and adaptation ideas to integrate this setting in your own campaign.
Today's episode: Holes.
But it is not an animated movie!
No, well, it's the summer, so yes.
Summer blockbusters.
Here we are, appropriately, a hot movie, a movie about being hot and being thirsty, and a summer movie at a summer camp. So
there you go, yeah.
Yes, this is the first of our summer blockbuster series. This month, next month, August, we'll be doing an alternative shift to our format.
And, yeah, if only there were a third movie about a lion who wants to be king, who hates his brother. But sadly, we couldn't do that. So
there's a live-action Disney movie about that. Let us know for next year.
There's a lion king in Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Yeah, there you
but
go.
He doesn't have a brother, so, yeah.
This is our summer blockbuster series. We are doing 3 live-action movies. We're taking the opportunity of summer to shift up our normal format and explore some of those live-action movies that we have wanted to make into Ravenloft domains. We're starting with this one because it was the easiest, because it basically wrote itself.
Yeah.
But I'm embarrassed to say this is not one of the ones we initially thought about.
No.
It's like starting on this project 3 years ago now, past.
2 years, yeah.
Yeah, 2 and change.
Yeah.
We had a couple live-action movies. We were like, oh, these are so perfect. These are so great. We want to figure out something to do with this. But Hole's not one of them. So shout out to our amazing Discord for suggesting this as a potential title. Because this, golly gee, as soon as they said it, it was like, wow, this really is a perfect domain.
And it's Walden Media, which is a subsidiary of Disney. So yes, we can do it.
It's on Disney Plus. I consider it in our realm of our sphere of influence.
Which is why Home Alone was not an April Fool's Day episode, but Princess Mononoke was.
Yep.
Or rather in April.
Not on Disney Plus, at least in America. As I mentioned, great domain. A great domain that can make, I think, some very cool stories. That can do some types of stories we haven't done before in our animated ones. I don't see a chance to do in our animated ones because as the legally distinct name on the DMs Guild we are using is Green Lake Prison Camp. Green Lake, one word. And totally different. And the key word there is prison. That this is a movie, a story, a book set mostly in a prison. And I don't know if there's any animated Disney movies that like feature a prison prominently.
Kind of Robin Hood, but that's,
But it's not like the central location like it is in this story.
Yeah. And it is it's an unusual kind of prison break story, but it is a prison break story.
And that's great to have in our toolbox. And of course, there is a prison. That means there is a warden, who we'll be talking more about in a section we like to call
The Lord. The Lord. Warden Louise Walker created Camp Green Lake some time ago, claiming that the prison's focus on rehabilitation through labor was a humane way to punish offenders who might still have a chance of becoming productive members of society. While this approach obviously had little appeal to certain rulers with a passion for impalement, others were all too happy to empty their own prisons by sending non-capital offenders to hers. Discrepancies in the warden's financial records suggest that she sends significant bribes to certain magistrates in exchange for their prisoners. Either she's a saintly and compassionate humanitarian who is willing to sacrifice her own fortune to see that the accused get a chance at rehabilitation, or her desire for forced labor is strong enough to warrant a financial investment. I have no illusions about which of these is true. In my letter of introduction, I had informed Warden Walker that my patron had expressed interest in making a sizable donation to Camp Green Lake, but desired a direct report of it beforehand, assuming, correctly, that this would lead to an immediate and enthusiastic tour. Most of this was handled by a greasy little man named Pendansky, whose cheerful smile was as authentic as a Wallachian peasant's. However, Warden Walker did personally greet me upon my arrival and invited me to dine with her in her home, which was a bastion of comfort despite the surrounding oppressive heat. She told me a pretty tale of Camp Green Lake's origins. Her grandfather's land, it had once been a lush town that sat on an actual lake until a ruinous drought destroyed it. Determined that something good should come from the site, she transformed it into the shining model of atonement that it is today. Any questions about why the inmates were set to the specific task of digging holes were met with a glib response about the innately redemptive nature of digging. The inmates themselves, however, told me a different tale, when I used Mask of Many Faces to disguise myself as one of them, as they did not trust anyone who might be in the warden's pocket. They informed me that they were under strict instructions to report to Warden Walker if they found anything interesting, and expressed frustration that finds such as fossils and beach glass were deemed unworthy of her attention. Something is buried in Camp Green Lake, and the warden has ensured that she has the hands she needs to dig it up for her.
So, our Lord, Warden Walker.
Mm-hmm. There really were not any other candidates.
No, so perfect for a lot of reasons we're going to go into. Mm-hmm. So, Warden Walker, written incredibly well. We both read the book. We both love the book. I was really happy to see it was a good adaptation. Mm-hmm. And, oh man, the warden is who we're going to be using as once again our non-IP, similar to but legally distinct.
They
character.
Generally just call her the warden.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
Book too, so we're even fine there. Yeah,
that's how most people. I think a lot of people would have to Google to find out she had another name.
Yeah.
So the warden is really, really, really built up with as this incredibly menacing, incredibly terrifying figure in the book, and man, then they pulled out Sigourney Weaver and just nailed it in the movie.
Excuse me. Oh,
yeah.
So great.
So,
just when you find out that Sigourney Weaver is the warden and Eartha Kitt is Madame Zeroni, what more do you need?
Really fantastic cast in that movie.
Yeah.
And so we love the warden. We love her as a Darklord. If you are of a particular generation, you watch this on Disney Channel or rented it from a video store or read the book in middle school.
I am a little bit too old for that generation, but I was a middle school English teacher in the mid-2000s, so there you go.
Yeah. I'm not a middle school English teacher, but I was a substitute teacher, and I believe at some point I read this in a school library when I was substituting for a middle school class having their library time, which is a pretty sweet deal for a substitute teacher.
Yeah.
You know, if you are any of those things, you know who the warden is, and if not, you really should. I know this is a niche one.
Yeah, this is a niche one. The movie is absolutely worth watching. The book is absolutely worth reading, and the movie is a very faithful adaptation of the book. So if you've read the book but not seen the movie, you're fine, although you should see the movie. It's great. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie, do yourself a favor and do one or the other. They're fantastic.
Yeah. And the movie, as we mentioned, is available on Disney+. So it's really good. And we were like, this is not going to have the broad appeal of some of these things, but there's a certain group of people that are just going to lose their minds when they find out we're doing holes.
Yeah.
Because it's really good. And if you
so good.
read it in middle school or teaching middle school, you were like, wow. So the warden's a perfect Darklord. You know who the warden is if you followed our advice or in that group we described. But Rachel is a Darklord.
Well, a Darklord is an evil being who commits some kind of act of ultimate darkness that causes the dark powers to say, why, hello, new friend, we want to play with you forever. And so they pluck that evil being up and place them in a special hell created just for them. There are some really amazing Darklords. There are some really not so amazing Darklords. So we are going to go through and describe the 4 qualities that we think really separate the Strahd von Zaroviches from the sorry Uruk von Karkovs. There's not an on-the-nose analog for the wardens who are going back to you. The first element is that act of ultimate darkness. Unlike Uruk von Karkov, they don't just do a bunch of random bad things and become a Dark Lord by attrition. They do one or big signature evil act that comes to define them. And in Strahd's case, it was killing his brother because he wanted to get with his brother's fiancée. Our second element is what they call in Van Ripton's Guide to Ravenloft the Torment, because we're a Disney podcast, we call it They Got What They Wanted, They Lost What They Had. In Strahd's case, it's, okay, yeah, Sergei's out of the way, so he's not standing between you and Tatiana. You have eternal youth, so your age isn't standing between you and Tatiana, but your Strahdness is standing between you and Tatiana. She is not into you, and she never will be. Our third element is an element of tragedy or relatability. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil. There's something about them that makes us wince in sympathy. In Strahd's case, it's that unrequited love is just the worst. And then our fourth and final element is that the domain reflects the Dark Lord into their curse in some way. Strahd is the Dark Lord of Barovia, which is creepy gothic vampire land. He is not the Dark Lord of Dominia, the evil asylum.
Yeah, there you go. On the nose, right? Up ropes.
But Heinfroth is a good Dark Lord, so I couldn't bring him in. But we're going to talk about Dominia later. And then the domain also reflects their curse, not just their creepy vampireness or creepy psychiatristness. And in Strahd's case, it's that it is Barovia is this boring mud slump. It's full of boring people, and that reflects that curse of loneliness. That he's lonely because he can't be with Tatiana, and he's never going to find somebody else who is a substitute for Tatiana, even if he wanted to.
So it's quite possible, kind of like with our Hadestown section, that you don't actually know...
That's a really good point.
...about this sort of Ravenloft, about this sort of D&D, Dungeons & Dragons. It might be possible you just really... You're that generational slice we talked about, and nobody talks about how great Holes is. And you're like, I'm here to hear about how great this movie is, and hear people talk about this movie / book.
I was also thinking the opposite, actually, that we might have listeners who have not seen Holes or read Holes, and so we might want to do, like we did with Hadestown, a quick little recap of who the warden is. But go ahead and do your spiel first.
Right. So in Dungeons & Dragons, I assume you've heard of that if you're a nerd on the internet. And there's different worlds, and one of those worlds is called Ravenloft, and Ravenloft is the spooky horror setting. And the idea is Ravenloft isn't just like one planet. It's actually a bunch of little reality bubbles that each have this kind of central figure that is called the Dark Lord. And that central figure kind of defines that reality bubble. And each is kind of a different genre of horror, different story of horror. So the original one, as Rachel mentioned, Strahd von Zarovich, is sort of the D&D equivalent of Dracula. And it's a spooky Transylvania vampire land.
Yeah.
There's a Dr. Frankenstein domain, which is all about icy, evil, inhuman super science. It has this kind of Dr. Frankenstein analog as the Domain Lord.
Yeah. Dominia is the creepy asylum. And it's got, the evil, the mad doctor running the creepy asylum doing experiments.
You've been to a haunted house.
You know
the deal. There's one that's an island of Dr. Moreau, and basically that Dr. Moreau equivalent is the Dark Lord.
So if you are a fan of Holes, you can see exactly where we're going with the domain, Camp Green Lake reflecting the warden's psychodrama.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you have not read Holes, I'm going to go, as I go through these 4 elements, the nice thing is we start with sort of the origin story element, which is called the Act of Ultimate Darkness. For our non-D&D listeners, this is the idea that your Dark Lord has this specific evil thing they do that sort of pulls them into this reality bubble and traps them there, and that is kind of their origin story.
If you have any interest in reading or seeing Holes, which you should, please pause this, go do that now, and then come back, because Holes has a lot of twists and turns, so and good. Getting into the warden's motivation and everything. We're going to be giving away a lot of the story. So if you don't have any intention of reading it or watching it, shame on you.
Yeah. You're not listening to us.
But you can't keep listening, and just we're going to spoil everything. If you do want to read or watch it, please do. Just pause this, watch it. We won't be offended, I promise.
We've never done this before. But once again, I think this is like the most obscure thing we've done, maybe.
Yeah.
And so legit, go watch it on Disney Plus. It'll be less than 2 hours. And
we'll be waiting for you, we promise.
Come back here.
Spotify's not going anywhere.
Really good.
Yeah.
So, we have this character. Her full name, I said most people don't even know, is Warden Walker.
Did we ever get her first name?
Yes, I can't remember what's on my head because I had it originally in the write-up. But I will do that if I have to.
Okay.
If I have to. If I get a red flag from DM's Guild.
Like we did for Big Hero 6.
I did for Big Hero 6. Maybe you are one of the lucky people that first, hour it was out, you grabbed the rare, name brand Big Hero 6. And then everybody else has gotten the PDF about Hero Team 6.
If you're wondering why suddenly all of the, changing the names has gotten aggressively more obvious.
My son and Lady Eboshi.
All the H's.
Yeah.
All the H's.
We flew a little too close to the sun with that one, so we're being careful.
Anyway.
But anyway, so this woman, she is the owner of in the story, in the book, she's the owner of a juvenile prison camp. And she's the warden of the juvenile prison camp, and it's built in the site of a former lake. That's why it's called Camp Green Lake. There used to be a lake there. In the book, it says it was the biggest lake in Texas. It was this very prosperous community. Her family was the wealthiest. They owned almost all the land. And then her family was cursed. Not in Dungeons & Dragons, in, the story itself.
Yeah. Curses are real in this world.
Yes. And they were cursed that her grandfather basically... I don't know the whole thing, but he committed this horrible act against this man and this woman. It never rained after that, and the lake dried up and became this massive desert. Mm-hmm. So the prison is kind of built in the ruins of the kind of ghost town, of the town that used to be there when it was an actual lake. Because that's they still own all the land.
And the woman, she was this outlaw named Kissing Kate Barlow. And she had hidden her treasure somewhere in the dry lake. Mm-hmm. She'd buried it there. And right as she was about to die, the warden's grandfather found her and was demanding to know where the treasure was. And she cursed him that you and your descendants will dig forever and never find it.
You will dig for 100 years and never find it. Mm-hmm. And so, we're not making up the curse thing.
Literally, there is a curse. Yes.
So somewhere in this desert is buried this enormous fortune that was the loot of this famous outlaw. Mm-hmm. And then we have this whole story that this is, the warden's grandfather was a man named Troutwalker. He was still young. He was just married when Kate Barlow died. But then he basically spends the rest of his life digging holes looking for that treasure. He's
kind of, you can think of it, he was the Gaston to her Belle.
Yes.
And if he couldn't possess her, he can at least possess her treasure.
Exactly. And so he's digging, and it becomes his obsession. And any good curse becomes his obsession, becomes his whole reason for living. He forces his children to dig. He forces his grandchildren to dig. Mm-hmm. And that's who the warden is. It is his granddaughter. And we even have this line about how every day she had to dig. Every day.
Blazing hot sun. Curse, it never rained.
Yep.
We even get there, there's never a cloud. Every now and then, if they're real lucky, a cloud will pass over the sun, but there's never even a cloudy day. Yeah.
So, this has been her entire life since she was big enough to hold a shovel. She's been forced to dig for this treasure. And this is where we are coming in and changing the story.
Yeah.
Because we need that act of ultimate darkness, and so we have it be, this was Rachel's idea, so I'll let you take it.
So yeah, we wanted her to commit a definitive act of ultimate darkness. We know that she has this building hatred and frustration against her grandfather. Mm-hmm. So we decided that at some point, she dug a hole and she told her grandfather that she had found the treasure. And he ran over and he was all excited and he jumped in and she hit him on the back of the head with the shovel and either killed him right then and there or just knocked him out. Mm-hmm. And then she buried him. So depending on how grim you want to be, she either buried him alive or dead. Buried alive. Buried alive. I like buried alive.
Yes.
Because, man, that's
you
delicious.
You and the evil queen.
She swore that would be the last hole she ever dug.
Mm-hmm. And at that moment, the mist rose up and brought her into Ravenloft. That means she's cursed doubled out. She's got her regular, not just any family curse. Now she's got a Darklord curse.
Yeah.
A torment. And then, once again, back to the main story, back to the canon. She turns this, as we said, into a kind of juvenile prison camp. So the idea is the story opens with the main character, Stanley Yelnats. He's found guilty of a crime he didn't commit, and he's given the option of either going to prison or going to this Camp Green Lake, juvenile rehabilitation center. And he's like, oh, a lake.
Camp Green Lake, that sounds nice.
That sounds nice. Maybe I'll go swimming. And it is a nightmare.
It is a nightmare.
So he goes there, and the idea is it is ostensibly a juvenile rehabilitation center, and they don't need any guard towers or walls or barely any staff because they are at the only water for scores of miles, for just miles and miles and miles, middle of a desert, the only water there is, and probably the only food source. So it's like, you know what, you want to run, go ahead and run.
Yeah.
This is a self-policing system because we have the only water. We have the last little spring that has any water in this whole entire desert. And the way they do the rehabilitation is the idea that every boy has to dig a hole 3 feet by 3 feet. And
5 feet by 5 feet.
5 feet by 5 feet. And they keep saying, and this is just so deliciously an obvious lie from the get-go, that it's to build character. That it's all about building character. That's why they're digging holes, to build character. And they even have this quote, their philosophy, if you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole in the hot sun every day
he turns into
a good boy. But they say,
ridiculous.
If you find something interesting, tell us, and if the warden likes it, she'll give you the day off. Which is a big red flag right there. This is not about character building. There's even, I don't remember if it's in the book, but it's in the movie where Stanley says, oh, what are we looking for? You're not looking for anything. You're building character.
And then in both the book and the movie, it's like Stanley finds a fossil. And he's like, oh, hey, that's interesting. It's like, no, the warden's not interested in fossils. So it's like, something interesting, but a specific interesting thing.
A specific interesting thing. So pretty much the warden has built a juvenile slave center. She is not zero interest in any kind of rehabilitation or justice system. She is using these young men for slave labor to find this treasure.
Yeah.
Which is smart.
But horrible.
Also, the funding. She gets funding from the state because it's a juvenile center. So it keeps, the coffers full while she searches for the trouble. But it's so awful.
Yeah.
We are adding a thing there. And part of it is just to make her more evil. And part of it is because, this is Ravenloft. They're not too concerned with the affairs of the justice system. That she has relationships with judges and magistrates in many, many other Ravenloft domains, reality bubbles, that she'll accept certain offenders and then they get a bribe, that they get a kickback.
Yeah.
So it might be people that normally would be given a day in the stocks or a fine or property seizure or something execution-y.
Yeah. She wants non-violent offenders because she doesn't want that level of trouble.
Yeah. She's not, actually going to try and make a prison that can, deal with violent or serious offenders. She wants non-violent offenders. Many of these, medieval, Renaissance-y places, there would be other punishments, but they're perfectly happy to send them to Camp Green Lake in exchange for a nice fat purse from the warden.
Yeah.
So we were adding that. It's not in the book, it's not in the movie, but we're adding that element of corruption, too. That she is bribing judges to basically get slave labor for her treasure hunting project. So, that is our act of ultimate darkness. She kills her father, and now she's basically maintaining a giant labor farm under the offensive pretense of criminal justice and, social reform and rehabilitation.
Apparently, this book is extremely popular in juvenile detention centers. So there was an interview with the author where he mentioned this, and yeah.
Our first element of a good Darklord, act of ultimate darkness. Then we have our second, our torment. They get what they wanted, they lost what they had, they seem to get what they want, but they're way worse off. They're their life is way worse, and they can never be happy, and they can never be satisfied, because they have this torment that comes from that choice of the act of ultimate darkness.
Yeah.
So, she has this prison, she has this free labor, she has, her promise. She never has to dig a hole again. But she can still give in that family curse of searching for the treasure. She's like, I'm going to get it, darn it. And it's sunk cost fallacy is a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
She spent her whole childhood and early adulthood digging for this treasure, and she does not care what it takes, who she has to hurt, who she has to kill. She's going to get that treasure, and she never will.
She never will.
She never, ever will.
And she could have just walked away. Yes. When she was an adult, she could have just, if she hadn't died of ultimate darkness, she could have just walked away from the Camp Green Lake and said, you know what, no, I'm done. Grandpa, you keep digging. I don't care. I'm gonna go live my life. But so all she ever did was dig holes in this barren wasteland, and now all she's ever going to do is watch other people dig holes in this barren wasteland. That woman has never seen rain in her life, and she never will.
Yes. She has a comfortable life, she has money, she has influence, she has everything anyone could ask for, but she's never leaving this camp. She's never leaving Camp Green Lake, and she's never going to find the treasure, and she's never going to, like, go to sleep happy. Mm-hmm. She's never going to go to sleep satisfied and content. Every day, she's going to go to sleep with that gnawing, not having the treasure, and she's going to wake up and wonder if today's going to be the day, and it never, ever will be.
And there's even, like, wanting to stick it to her grandma.
Sure, yeah, she's
like,
going to show
never,
him, yeah.
He never found it, but she will.
She's going to win, yeah.
No, she's not going to win.
She never will.
She never will.
So her element of tragedy and relatability. You have the pity of her being born into this curse. You know, she did not ask for this. She did not do any of the crimes that caused this curse to happen. Her parents weren't even born when this curse happened. She's born into this curse. She was basically, you know, slave labor for her grandpa. Her family was forced by this horrible person's horrible obsession to just labor every day in the sun. And that's pitiable.
Yeah.
There's, you know, if you've seen the movie, you've read the book, it is a moment we're going to come back to. The spoiler alert, we warned you. The Stanley, the main character, they find a treasure, and they're leaving, and he found this, like, satchel that has a treasure in it, and they're leaving, and she says, Stanley, I have it written down, but I'm not going to scroll down. Stanley, basically something like, Stanley, can I please just see inside? Can you please just open it for me? I've looked for it my entire life. Stanley, to his credit, is like, no. Says, excuse me? But, like, that's one of the two moments. The other is her talking about how she had to dig a hole every day.
Even on her birthday and Christmas.
Even on her birthday and Christmas, she had to dig a hole. And that's the other moment that please just let me look. Just let me see it. Just open it and let me see it. My entire life, I've looked for this treasure. And that's the stab of pity.
Yeah.
That's the stab of sympathy for this horrible person.
Yeah. And there's also, you know, again, with the whole, like, they don't get this dark with it in the book. Like, there is some, I'm just realizing it now as we're talking about, like, generational trauma and curses and everything, that there is some, like, mirroring her with Stanley, because Stanley also has a generational curse. So there's kind of this idea that they both are, you know, being cursed by things that their ancestors said that they didn't have any part of, but Stanley chooses to be a good person and she doesn't. So she's a good dark mirror for him. Yeah. I didn't realize that until just
now. Yeah, that's a good book. Go, folks.
It's great. But that also, that, like, because of the form that the walker's reaction to their curse takes, that it could be interpreted as being, like, cycles of abuse. That, like, that her grandfather reacted to this curse by basically enslaving her and her parents. And that's the life she knows, that's the way she knows to behave, and so she's enacting that abuse on other people.
Yes.
And that's, like, not okay at all, but there's that stab of pity there. There's that, you know, this isn't the life that she chose.
Yes.
She could have not become a monster, but there were a lot of monster cards in the deck being dealt to her.
And once again, we're not saying she's a good person.
No, not at all.
She's a horrible person.
And we're not saying if she made every bad choice she made.
But element of tragedy and relatability. That's almost the definition of tragedy.
Yeah.
Someone is born into this horrible circumstances, and yet they become the monster that shaped them.
That she is now her grandfather, only even more so.
That is tragic.
Yeah.
And that is why it's an element of tragedy and relatability. The domain reflects the Darklord's personality or curse. They dig holes.
She used to dig holes.
We've touched on this. It's the generational story.
Yeah.
That, as we said, a big part of this story is about curses, is about the past affecting the present, trying to sort of overcome some of the mistakes and some of the traumas of the past, or not overcoming them in the case of the warden, and indeed spreading them. So we kind of already touched on this. She has become her grandfather. You know, she has become her abuser, only way beyond that, because she didn't just have kids and force them to dig a hole. She's basically, like, franchised her abuse.
Mick Walker's.
Yeah, right? Like, she's made her horrible childhood everyone's problem.
Yeah.
Like, everyone who gets arrested and gets sentenced to that camp, it's their problem. And they're going to suffer and toil and be in this horrible situation to kind of continue this psychodrama of her, trying to sunk cost fallacy and also sort of one-up her grandpa and be a victim of this curse. So, yeah, very, very, very clear, not just they dig holes, but they dig holes.
Yeah.
So, the stat block for the Warden, we are using the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which for our Holes listeners is the kind of official book to this kind of horror setting. So, the Warden has base stats similar to a noble, because that gives you some of the social stuff. They give a position of privilege. In the back of the Book of Holes, there's an excerpt from Stanley Yelnats' Survival Guide to Camp Green Lake, and he even has a line about how, like, the Walker family still has some, like, political influence and some, like, friends in the state capitol and things, so...
She has some money to keep doing all of these bribes. So,
right, yeah. It's just the connections to get, like, in touch with judges and magistrates and stuff. So she's a noble. And then we're also giving her some special powers. A big one. This is a big, I think, flaw in the noble stat block.
Yeah.
Intimidation.
We were looking
Good
for somebody
Lord.
with intimidation that's like, it's a thug and a thug.
Yeah.
Like, if you want intimidation in the NPC write-ups, you better be a thug.
In the base monster manual.
Yeah.
You better be a thug. They're the only intimidating people in the world, apparently.
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, thugs are pretty intimidating.
Yeah, so, Intimidated is charisma-based, so just she has the same amount of Intimidate as she does Deception and Persuasion.
Right, she gets advantage, which once again, not even as a superpower, I feel like the warden of a prison that you are in, you are a prisoner in, gets advantage to intimidate you.
Yeah.
Because they can make your life hell.
She's got that +5 anti-advantage.
Yep. She's got, so cool, so Dungeons & Dragons, the rattlesnake fingernail polish. She's got, like, a claw attack that does poison damage and necrotic damage. So and kind of, I imagine, counts a magic weapon, too. So she can just slash your face. You know, these big boils on your face. So awesome. In the book and in the movie, someone has a line about saying she has the whole place bugged.
Like, she knows Stanley has a nickname among the other inmates, and she knows his nickname without having to ask anybody. So
she seems to know all their nicknames. Like, when she talks about the inmates, she usually uses their, like, prison nicknames, not their official names. She kind of seems to know some of the social situations.
Yeah, the dynamics.
Yeah, and maybe it's full-on bugged. Maybe it's just a lot of people report to her. But she has got... We're giving her scrying. We're saying she basically can scry at will anywhere in the camp. And she does this. She regularly keeps tabs on them.
But only in, like, the barracks area, not when you're actually out digging the holes. Only in, like, the actual, like, campsite.
Yes. She's got, like, the equivalent of, I know in Haslan, there was, like, the whole Eye of Haslick and, like, logo.
That's a good way to do it.
That's a good way to do it, yeah. There was, like, this kind of Eye of Haslick crest that people would have to show their loyalty to the lord of that land. But magically, he could, whenever he wanted, see through any of those eyes. So people were basically wearing, like, jewelry with, like, little, like, video cameras for him on parabolic mics on them.
That's a good way to do it, to have kind of like the Eye of Haslick, but it's like the Camp Green Lake insignia.
Like, logo. Like, wherever there's the Camp Green Lake insignia, which there is everywhere in camp.
Including sewn on deer overalls.
Yep.
But she once you leave the camp, she can't see through your overalls, but she can look through your shirt.
Yes. And this is going to be great for PCs. We're jumping ahead a little bit. This is going to be great for PCs because it's one of those everybody suspects. Just, she always seems to know what's going on. She always seems to know, like, people's plans or schemes or cons or whatever. And so everybody, PCs are very early going to get the information that she's got everything bugged, but they can talk on the dig. And it even gives you something to do with the dig scenes. Yeah. And that's like, I guess make a strength athletics roll to see how fast you dig your hole. Maybe level of exhaustion. Like, no, those scenes are important because that is where they can talk privately.
Yeah. Because we see in both the book and the movie, there's a whole, when they're in the dig, they come up with this, like, scheme, Stanley and this other guy, X-Ray, that the warden knows nothing about.
So yeah, she's got this, like, super scrying, but it's only in the actual, like, prison complex. And for the dig, once again, sometimes they'll take them, like, miles out into the desert away from it. She also has, once again, it's not a superpower, it's just being clever, that the staff there's two main staffers we see in the book and the movie. I think in the background of a couple shots in the movie, we might see a couple other adult staffers, and it kind of makes sense there could be more adult staffers. So the staff, it says she basically hires people that are shady. Yeah. So, like, the main sort of guard is got a warrant out for his arrest. And then there's this guy who's sort of supposed to be the therapist, and he's not a real doctor. No. So that she has deliberately hired people that are wanted, that have warrants, that are fugitives, that are in danger. So she has this absolute iron grip on them.
Because she is their only protection.
She's their only protection. Like, if they have to leave, if she fires them, they're going back into the meat grinder. Mm-hmm. But as long as they're there, as long as they're on the camp, they're safe, as long as they do what she says.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have a power that all Darklords have for our host listeners. This is called closing the borders. The idea is every Darklord can sort of lock their reality bubble, because otherwise, why don't they just leave the haunted house?
Yes.
Why don't they leave? If you discovered you were in Dracula's Transylvania, you would probably just spend the night at the train station and then leave.
Yeah, yeah.
And
if you're in Hill House, you're going to leave Hill House.
Right. You're going to, like, look around, a couple weird things are going to happen, and you're like, nope, and you're going to leave.
You're going to leave the Overlook.
But no, Dungeons & Dragons has anticipated that reaction, and you cannot leave as a plot element. Mm-hmm. And this is really easy. That when she closes the borders, the desert becomes impassable.
Yeah.
The mist in this form, it's always mist around these borders, these domains, but here it's like the heat shimmer. Mm-hmm. And the more sort of mirage heat shimmer. And the idea is if she closes the borders, you just walk, and the desert never changes, and eventually you pass out.
Yeah, like, even if you have spells that allow you to teleport, and theoretically that should be able to take you to the border. Nope, doesn't happen.
You'll just be in the desert. Mm-hmm. And it'll all just blur together. You'll have no idea where you are, just in the middle of a flat desert, and until you pass out.
Yeah.
We are putting in an exception here. This is unusual. Most places, this is a pretty ironclad power they have. There's no exception. But the exception is if you have a piece of Kate Barlow's treasure. Mm-hmm. If you have a piece of Kate Barlow's treasure, you can leave even if she's closed the borders. You can escape.
Yeah. And kind of the reason we wanted to do that was because in the movie, that's basically finding the treasure is how Stanley's able to get out. But we don't want it to be that you find the entire treasure and then you leave, because if there is no treasure, there is no torment.
Right.
So we want it to be, if you find a little bit of the treasure, basically, it's the whole, like, kind of the curse logic of Kate Barlow has trapped them there while they're digging for the treasure. So you find the treasure, you get out, and finding the treasure represents her finding her ability to get out, and now you can get out. Like, it lets you kind of have that whole story.
Yes.
Where you find the treasure and leave. Without finding all of the treasure and her getting arrested and her torment ending. Yeah,
we're imagining sort of the multiple small caches.
Yeah, yeah.
Like maybe hundreds of caches of loot scattered through the desert.
Yeah, yeah.
And also this works very well as sort of a metaphor for how the warden is trapped. That she can never leave. In the metaphysics of the setting, she can never leave because she's a domain lord. She's trapped in this reality bubble. But in this sort of metaphor level, she can't ever leave because she can never find a piece of the treasure.
Yeah, that leaving and finding the treasure are one and the same.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, thank you. That's a very good way of phrasing it. Leaving and finding treasure one and the same for her, and she'll never do both. Mm-hmm. And there's another reason we want to have that exception, and we'll talk about a little more when we get into running an adventure in this.
Yeah. Because that was the trickiest part of doing holes.
Finally, in this section, we like to do quotes. In Dungeons & Dragons, when they give you an NPC, a non-player character like this, or like Strahd in our spooky Transylvania land, they give you the role-playing trait, ideal, bonded, flaw, and they give them as quotes. So as much as possible, we like to give those as quotes this character says to sort of tell the DM, the narrator, how to role-play this character. If you are making a story about people going to Camp Green Lake, how do you, the narrator, the storyteller, the DM, role play the warden in those scenes where the characters interact with the warden? So I found some quotes. There aren't that many because she actually isn't in much of the story.
Yeah. She's a woman of few words.
She's a felt presence.
Yeah.
She's really like, if you look at the book, there's like 4 big scenes with her.
Yeah.
But here is what I have.
Okay.
And we want to find one of these that is kind of showing her personality, one of these that shows the thing that guides her, one of the things that shows sort of the things most important to her, which I feel like we have a good sense of what that is, and then one that shows her big character flaw.
So her trait, ideal, bonded, flaw are the names of these things.
Stanley, won't you just open it? Just let me see what's inside it, please.
Oh.
So I don't know if we...
That's got strong bond.
That's got strong bond things. Yes, strong bond. I wish it specifically said, like, the treasure or the loot or whatever, but you know. You're going to read it and you're going to know. This is my special nail polish. I make it myself. You want to know my secret ingredient? Rattlesnake venom. I just love what it does to the coloring. It's perfectly harmless when it's dry. That might be a role-playing trait for, like, the violence and the intimidation, the cruelty. And once again, spoiler alert, she then, like, the fact that she turns around and does this on one of her employees.
Yeah. For bothering her.
For bothering her, yeah. And so that's a potential role-playing trait. Mm-hmm. Are you trying to be funny, or do you think I'm just stupid?
Oh, I really like that for role-playing.
I really like the role-playing trait. I was thinking role-playing trait. Yeah, that's a very good, the kind of thing she's going to do, interacting with the PCs. Because even if she's talking to a prisoner, she says, and that's a great, like, there's a no-win. It's the sort of horrible authority figure no-win. Are you trying to be funny, or do you think I'm stupid?
Yeah.
And I love the guy's like, I'm not trying to be funny.
Oh!
And I don't think you're stupid.
Oh no!
Yeah. So that's a perfect, she's like the worst kind of authority figure. Excuse me? I can't just have excuse me, but fortunately I found this
Sadly.
one. Excuse me, did I ask when you last filled them? That...
I really like that for trait, but it might be...
Right. I could also see it for flaw. Maybe. I don't know. It's so good. We have to work in excuse me. It's your signature line.
Maybe that's her intimidate powers. Excuse me.
Excuse me? Yeah, probably. There you go. That's even intimidate power. Excuse me? Did I ask you when you last filled them?
Because I want excuse me to be her trait, but did ask me when I last filled them is... I don't know. It's just...
Okay.
I don't feel like it quite works.
Do you know how long... When I was little, I'd watch my parents dig holes every weekend and holiday. When I got bigger, I had to dig too. And I cut the even on Christmas, because, this is Dungeons and Dragons world.
Yeah.
So this... Gosh, this is a hard one. Let me look up some more quotes. Hang on.
So I found a couple more. This is a real strong... These are from the book.
Right, yeah.
Just so long as I have the suitcase, I don't care what happens.
Ah, nice. Okay, yeah, that screams...
Bond.
Yeah.
You're giving these boys too much water.
Ooh, gosh. Flaw, maybe?
Yeah, that she's so cruel.
So cruel.
Yeah, and the context for it was this, so... If you haven't read it or it's been a while, there's this bit where Stanley, our protagonist, he finds a little bit of the treasure. Or like a clue for the treasure. But for reasons, they pretend that they found it somewhere else. It makes sense in the movie, go with it. And so she's having them all dig in that spot, and they're not finding anything, and she's all excited, but they're digging and digging and digging and digging and still not finding anything. And like when it starts out, she's just showering them with everything, like as much water as they need. She's promising them steak dinners, like all, like just showering them with attention and affection. And then the more they're going, the more they're not finding anything, the angrier she's getting, and then she finally tells me, you're giving these boys too much water.
Yeah, the cruelty and the deprivation and the abuse, and they're not doing anything wrong, she's just mad that she's not finding her treasure. And I'm thinking for Ideal, the Stanley, won't you just open it, let me see what's inside, please.
Yeah.
I think it's the only point in the book or the movie where she says please to anyone or anything.
Yeah.
This is the most, and even the Ideal, the Bond, but as with a good character, the thing that's guiding her, the principles guiding her, the things she cares about are connected. So it's all about the treasure for her.
Yeah.
And it's tricky for us because these are not great quotes, but she never talks openly about the treasure because she's kind of trying to keep it secret.
Yeah.
So that's tricky for us.
And we were even, with some of the quotes we were looking at, it's like, they make sense in context.
Yeah.
So we were just looking at, she's got the scene with the rattlesnake venom, and she scratches her subordinate instead of, he's bringing her Stanley, and he thinks that she's going to scratch Stanley.
He's all excited.
He's all excited
That's
for
so
it.
Good.
But she scratches him instead because he wasted her time bringing her Stanley, because it wasn't about the treasure.
Right, even she doesn't care about the prison or the discipline or the character, the rehabilitation. She doesn't care about anything but the treasure.
And then as she's looking down at a bright thing on the ground, she says, I liked you better when you smoked. Which, if you've read the book or seen the movie, makes perfect sense in context.
It's a great line.
If you haven't, you're really confused.
That is a great line to do on someone. I liked you better when you smoked. But yes, it would not work for our purposes. So here we go. We have our role-playing trait, Ideal, Bond, and Flaw. So we could talk more about our discussion of the amazing character of Warden Walker, amazingly played by Sigourney Weaver.
As every character played by Sigourney Weaver is, including the voice in Finding Dory.
Yes. So she's the warden of Green Lake Prison Camp, but let's talk a bit more about the experience of Green Lake Prison Camp for those prisoners who she's not scratching with rattlesnake venom. She actually doesn't care about what they're doing, as long as they're digging for holes. In a section we like to call
The Land. The Land. Other than the prison complex and the derelict remains of a ghost town, Camp Green Lake consists of nothing but an eternity of sun-baked earth riddled with holes. There are no fences or guard towers. The desert is vast, and anyone who tries to run away will find that heat and dehydration are more pitiless than the cruelest jailer. Every morning before dawn, the inmates are taken to an untouched patch of land where each of them must dig a hole, 5 by 5 by 5 feet. When it is complete, they may return to the prison complex for the rest of the day. If they are quick, they can finish before the heat reaches its murderous peak. Unfortunately, however, the weather is not the only danger within the desert. Rattlesnakes, fire mephits, and dust devils lurk in the sand, and the inmates tell stories about the undead corpses of those claimed by the elements. Most dreaded of all, however, are the yellow-spotted lizards. Supposedly, their fangs are so venomous that even the hardiest soul will die within seconds of being bitten. In addition to the desiccated zombies that supposedly roam the desert, some of the prisoners swear that Camp Green Lake is haunted. Each of them seems to know a former inmate who has seen a kind-eyed man leading a donkey, a beautiful woman wielding pistols, or an old man with a ghastly head wound. Of course, all of them vanished at a second glance, or glided over a hole as though it were solid ground, or displayed some other workaday haunting behavior. I was tempted to dismiss these stories at first, as every community has its local ghost legends. Later discoveries suggested that there may have been more to these apparitions than boredom and imagination.
So in this section, we're going to be talking about the Green Lake Prison Camp, the structure. We've kind of gone over our Darklord. We've gone over the warden. We've gone over how you're kind of entering her psychodrama and acting as a sort of minion of her family curse when you get sent to this prison. Now let's talk about what that experience would be for your players to be sent to Green Lake Prison Camp.
Which has no lake.
Which has no lake. It's just a desert, as we mentioned, for miles and miles and miles, which means there is minimal security. There's like 2 really staffers that we focus on in the book and in the movie. I think there's, as I mentioned, I think there's a couple scenes where you see a couple other staffers kind of wandering around the background, but like that's it. There's no more than a half dozen people, adults, that work there for the warden. Everything else is just this sort of self-policed, digging-based society. The average day, you get woken up at like 4:30, I think they said, and you get, dressed, and you get a shovel. And they drive you out to a particular dig site.
And it's still dark because when the heat of the day starts, it's bad. So
it's like waking you up at 4:30 is a real bummer, but it actually is to your benefit. Kind of the goal of everyone is to get their hole dug as early as possible, not just because they're done faster, but because you want to get done before the heat of the day. Before the afternoon. And then you dig. And your shovel is 5 feet, and you use the shovel to measure the depth and the width. So a 5 foot by 5 foot hole, and which I guess she's decided is enough to see if there's anything buried down there. And then once you are done that 5 foot by 5 foot hole measured with your shovel,
you spit in it. Very important.
That's not a rule. That's just a tradition of the camp. And then you have the rest of the day off. You can kind of just wander back to camp and have the rest of the day off. It's not too hard to keep an eye on everyone because it's a big flat desert. And this is a perfect setup for PC prison break shenanigans. Because first off, we mentioned you have that private time. There's just a couple of moments during the day, though every couple of hours a water truck will come by. In this case, it would be like a water, cart will come by, and it will refill they all get a water bottle, and it refills like a gallon water jug, and they refill a gallon water jug. And then like a couple hours in, they bring food. They basically bring lunch. But other than that, the prisoners are pretty much left totally unsupervised in the digging process. So that's perfect for PC planning. And then if they get their holes done, they have this rest of the day off. And that is so perfect to give you that free time to have PC shenanigans. Like, that's the space for the PCs to get up to whatever shenanigans that they are going to inevitably get up to.
Yes.
So I love this setup. It's almost like it was specifically designed to be perfect for like a prison break story. And that could also be perfect for your prison break story.
So there are a couple of like noteworthy features and areas. It's not just a giant dry lake bed, although that is the most noteworthy feature of Camp Green Lake, is being a giant dry lake bed. And the first noteworthy feature is the camp, like the actual prison camp, the barracks, is kind of the abandoned town. Because Camp Green Lake used to be a town back when it was an actual lake. and that this is what's been converted to the prison. And within the camp, the prisoners are kind of divided into their tents or their squads. So in the movie/book, we are traveling with D-tents.
Yes.
And the idea is, D-tent is they're all taken out to one particular area, and everybody in D-tent digs there. And, C-tent is taken out to this other area. And that gives you a good, if you want your PCs to just kind of be, G-tent together and it's just the PCs you can, or if you want to give them some NPCs to bounce off of, then you can just kind of flesh out that one tent. You don't have to have the entire prison. It's basically their cell block.
Right.
They're a natural social group. They've got your back. There's a leader who's been there the longest. They do look out for you, but they also expect obedience. And that is, that's the role that X-Ray takes in the book. He's a leader. He does look out for the people in D-Temp, but at the same time, he wants to make sure that they always know that he's the one in charge.
Yeah.
If you wanted to have a relationship with a bit more animosity, you could definitely do that.
Yeah,
We're going to be talking about that in Aging Up. But kind of the default that we're imagining is having an X-Ray type figure who, he does have your back because you're D-Tent too, but he's not going to let you forget that he's the one in charge.
There's a scene in both the book and the movie. It's in the rec room, and this is one of the big areas they mix. So it's kind of edgy, kind of dangerous. And the main character, Stanley, kind of trips and bumps into this really big bruiser guy. And the guy's just about to pound the heck out of him. And X-Ray steps in and kind of talks to him. He's like, oh, come on, he's just a punk. He doesn't know what he's doing. And, he helps Stan. And the rest of the crew, the rest of D10 is kind of, paying attention and starting to square up a little. The whole, Stanley's still the new guy. This is, his first or second day. They don't really like him that much, but he's part of their team.
Yeah. And you mess with one guy from D10, you mess with everybody from D10. You can get your normal prison culture stuff. There's gangs, there's fights, you can have protection rackets. That the bigger, tougher guys are demanding your cookie or whatever.
There is mail. So one of those, if you get stuff, someone sends you, your mom sends you cookies, or, in a more sort of adult setting, it's if somebody sends you, money. That, not even in a way, if you have some kind of wealthy connection, it's very, very classic prison story stuff.
Yeah.
If you have a wealthy connection, then you can use that money to get protection, or to get privileges, to buy off stuff, or any of those kind of things.
And just hope that somebody doesn't just beat you up and take it.
Yes.
And then, again, there is the common room, and that's where you have your main interactions outside the tent, and that's where you can kind of bring in some of the gangs into the politics and the factions and stuff. Yeah.
If you wanted to do, I think it makes sense, and it's probably best to have your PCs in a tent, but you could maybe do something interesting with having them divided into, 2 or 3 tents, have them interact with their own little cast of NPCs, and then the common room in the afternoon, that's going to be the big, okay, now everybody role play together. And, okay, I found out this from my tent, and you found out this from your people, and we found this in our part of the desert, and here's us kind of coming together to talk over the day and, figure out our next moves.
That would be an interesting challenge, too, because the warden has the common room bug. She doesn't have the holes bug. So it's that would be taking away their main way of interacting with each other. So that would be quite an interesting challenge. And then there's the quartermaster. The quartermaster that's basically he's hanging on to all of your stuff, all the stuff that got confiscated when you were arrested. All your weapons are there. All your spell components are there.
All those things PCs love so much.
All those things PCs love so much. So this is going to kind of the main area where they actually are going to have some guards and protections up, because they know if you get hold of your spell components, then suddenly you might actually be able to escape into Camp Green Lake. In holes, there's no magic.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the main challenge if you're trying to escape. That's not survival based. Is they're going to have good locks. They're going to have good traps. They're going to have a guard on it.
In the movie, we just hear about it in the book, but in the movie we see it actually is a couple of the campers working there, and I get the impression that this is one of those work jobs that you could get if you're cozied up and if you're high in favor, because it's much nicer than digging holes. And this is one of those where you could have some nice social stuff, because a lot of what the PCs are planning is probably going to involve getting their gear, or at least their spell components and their weapons, and either bribing or persuading or doing something to get some of the work, release equivalent. The camp, the prisoners, the inmates who work the quartermasters, getting them to help you. Maybe slip you the keys, or you pickpocket. This is a great step one in PC Prison Break plan. Step 1, get access to the quartermasters and get our stuff. And there even is an access point. This is also where they get, like, given their gear. So I remember, like, this is when he's checking in, he, like, turns in the bag that has this, like, civilian clothes and his stuff, and he gets the uniform. But then I seem to recall this is like they all line up there and get their shovels at the start of the day. So you even have, or they get their like water bottles there. So you even have these like access points a clever PC might figure out how to do something with. To grab the key, palm the key, and stick a copy in wax or something. You know, like PCs do.
Like PCs do. And then there's the warden's house. And the warden's house is very nice.
Yes.
She's got the shade trees.
It is not a, like, ghost town house.
No, it is a real house. But you do not want to go there under any circumstances.
Yes.
Because you are going there if you were in trouble. But if you do go there, either because you get in trouble and, you know, you manage to get yourself alone in the room while she's doing something else, or because you've managed to get some kind of cushy job, which we'll get to in a minute, there's a lot of clues there. Because we mentioned part of the problem with the warden, kind of one of the big challenges for finding the quotes for her, is that she is playing all this very close to her chest. That she doesn't want anybody to know the reason why she's having her many dig holes. But she's got, you know, her little, like, scrapbook and dossier full of everything that she's managed to gather about this backstory, about kissing Kate Barlow and her treasure and the history and the this and the that, and, like, you know, her map of, you know, everywhere that anywhere's ever been found. So if you get into the warden's house, then you have a good chance of finding some interesting information, but boy, are you in trouble if she catches you.
Yeah. And this is another one of those, it's specifically in the book and the movie, they have prisoners washing her car, which is a really nice, like, kind of classic car, and they talk about in the book prisoners washing her car, but then we also see, like, when Stanley comes in the movie, there's also, like, some prisoners, like, mowing her lawn and trimming her, the little hedges. She has a little patch of green, or, like, we know her house is the only air-conditioned building in the... Because, of course, it's air-conditioned. So this is another one of those things where this is a privilege. And
she's got this fine Nova Vossen horse.
Yes.
You're currying her horse.
Yes, if you've got some experience, you could... And that's, once again, much more pleasant than digging a hole in the hot sun for half the day, every day, a 5 foot by 5 foot hole. So if you can get, like... even just a couple days a week, I just do the chores. And we can expand that, like, you know, there could be people that just do, like, the sweeping and the scrubbing and, or even cooking. Like, you know, she doesn't eat the slop they serve to the prisoners and maybe even the rest of the staff. I'm sure she has a prisoner or two and a private kitchen and a private pantry full of wonderful things. And that is an incredibly cushy job.
Yeah.
Is it to be on the warden's household staff. And you're still basically unpaid labor, but it's better than digging a hole.
Yeah, and if you're like a druid or a ranger or whatever, you have more animal handle than these average prisoners do, so you can get in on that cushy horse currying job.
Or maybe have those backgrounds in, like, you have chef's utensils. You have proficiency in chef's utensils, and that could be a major critical part of your plan and your escape is you get a job in the kitchen, the warden's kitchen, because you're actually a really good cook. So the nice thing here is we have established in the source material this idea of some people having these prison jobs, and that means you have the social possibility that, like, escaping isn't just fighting or sneaking or picking locks. It's probably all of those things, but also, like, your bard, your charismatic one, your phase can play this critical role in that escape by doing some kind of social manipulation of some of these people, some of these high-ranking, privileged, like, prison job positions.
Yeah. We've talked about in some of our other settings that have kind of this survival element, like Arendelle, that the trick is not having the druid and the ranger be OP. And that is absolutely an issue here. You know, that we're talking about in strengths of challenges of the, you know, if you can cast good barrier, God.
Only Stanley Yelnats could have casted good. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble.
But the great thing is there's stuff for everybody to do here. There's social. There's the rogue going in and stealing stuff. There's, you know, you're going to talk about some of the encounters that you're going to run into in the desert, because...
I love the rogue steals like a fork to make into a lockpick and has to pick the locks, and even your fighter gets to be like your muscle. Gets to be like, I'm going to stop the, you know, protection racket guy from messing with my people.
Yeah,
or maybe
B10's not going to touch us.
Yeah, B10's not going to touch us. So we got this big, tough, burly fighter on our side. who still does quite a decent unarmed attack with that strength bonus.
Yes.
So this is a great setting, and this, the warden, the prison, the details of the prison, the details of the day, the digging the hole, all that. This all wrote itself.
Mm-hmm.
This is the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Next, we're getting into running the adventures, and that was a little trickier. That was the work part of the coming up with this domain. But what would bring your PCs to this very, very unpleasant place? Rachel, what do you do with it?
Dread possibilities. The warden attempted to keep a tight leash on me during my visit. Unsurprising, as it was clear she had something to hide. At one point, however, a commotion erupted when one of the inmates found something on the dig, a belt buckle etched with the initials KB. Apparently this was more interesting than fossils or beach glass, as the warden insisted on visiting the site immediately. In the chaos, I was able to slip away, assuming gaseous form to enter the warden's cabin through the crack under her door. I had overheard the inmates gossiping about how she never unlocked the study even for cleaning, so I immediately drifted through the keyhole of that room. The study was filled with books on local history, and the warden had bookmarked or annotated several pages pertaining to an outlaw called Kissing Kate Barlow, a bandit who, judging by the portrait in one of the books, precisely matched the prisoner's descriptions of the female ghost. Barlow had terrorized the area around Green Lake some 100 years earlier, beginning when the rain stopped and continuing until her death. Although she had amassed fabulous amounts of treasure, none of it had ever been found. A drawer in the warden's desk revealed a map detailing every one of the desert's thousands of holes, with notations where the prisoners had found something of interest, often some bit of paraphernalia marked with the initials KB. Far from the prison camp was a picture of a house, marked Grandfather, surrounded by hundreds more holes. Clearly, this search stretched all the way back to the land's original owner. I heard the sound of a throat clearing at the door of the study. "Excuse me?" I looked up to see Warden Walker leaning against the door jamb, studying her glistening red fingernails. She said that she had thought I might try something like this when she saw me change shape, although I had made certain that no one was nearby when I had used Mask of Many Faces. She hoped that my patron would understand when he heard that I had succumbed to the bite of a rattlesnake. The desert was a dangerous place after all. Luckily, gaseous form was the only spell I had to cast that day, and the camp's security was thin enough that invisibility was more than sufficient to escape. The warden was correct that the desert was a dangerous place, however, and surviving it long enough to reach the borders would prove to be another matter.
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
I want it more than I can tell. So why did you come to Camp Green Lake?
Caravans, I assume.
I mean, they gotta get their water from somewhere, right? Actually.
Really? There's like a supply truck that brings in the food.
Yeah.
Even they have like a spring by the warden's house. They got to bring in their food in their like coveralls and stuff.
Yeah. But no, there is a very obvious default way that you got here because it's a prison break story. Yeah. So you're in prison. You got arrested. You got your constable got kickbacks to send you to Camp Green Lake because it was just more trouble than it was worth to put you in the stocks. Mm-hmm. You could be the warden's problem. Adventurers always break out of the stocks and cause trouble. So. So that's one possibility. Another possibility might be if you're trying to bust somebody else out. Yeah. You might be like going undercover and searching the prison, and maybe you deliberately got yourself arrested and sent to Camp Green Lake.
That's great, out. Right? Yeah. That's a classic. Your prison break the show type plan of. And on the one hand, you do PC shenanigans to get arrested, get sentenced to Camp Green Lake. That is your authentically Stanley Yelnats experience.
Yes.
But it's so cool to be like, no, we're like coming in to do the break. We're like, no, we're like deliberately getting arrested because we want to get sent to this prison because we got the blueprint tattooed to our back like Wentworth Miller in Prison Break. Because we're like, that's cool. That's like you're a cool dude. You're not a chump. I mean,
everybody wants to be Wentworth Miller.
Everybody wants to be Wentworth Miller in any show, especially Prison Break.
I would argue especially Flash.
Yes. Just, you know what, you're a cool guy, cool hero, you're like, you got an angle, you like got a plan, you're not a chump, you're not like a victim, and PCs are gonna like eat that up. If you dangle the possibility of we need to get this person, we need to get a Stanley Yelnats out of prison for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh man, we gotta get ourselves arrested. Like, oh, we're gonna go in and we're gonna bust out of the place.
Yeah. And it could be especially fun if, like, instead of it being some, like, you know, goody two-shoes adventurer who got, you know, arrested for thumbing their nose at Frollo or whatever. It's like, no, this person got arrested because they are a terrible human being.
Yes.
No, this is like you're breaking out Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
Because he's the one who knows Buffalo Bill. Well, they're not Hannibal Lecter because they're nonviolent defenders, but you know what we mean.
The equivalent. The nonviolent equivalent of Hannibal Lecter.
Phrases we did not think we were saying.
Go around cutting people's hair off. Making it into wigs. And then one other possibility, if you are trying to work this into a pre-existing thing, it might be if you have some magic MacGuffin you need. And we've done this a couple times before, because it's a great, like, here's a very elaborate sequence of steps you need to take to get the very specific magic MacGuffin. And it can be that they trace the MacGuffin to Kate Barlow, having stolen it, having robbed it, and this is the only way to get access to that. To kind of get access to her old territory, her old stomping grounds, or they find some, you know, divination points them to being buried somewhere in Green Lake.
Yeah. And the problem with that is it does mean that you're solving a good chunk of the mystery, like, right off the bat, because part of the mystery, as we're going to get into, is uncovering that they're looking for Kate Barlow's treasure, and that it's there, and that it's a thing. But, you know, on the other hand, maybe that's an advantage for you, because you want to have them, like, solve this mystery while they have all these resources at their disposal, rather than while they're in the prison. So, you know.
Or even just, you want a slightly shorter adventure, and you kind of want to just, like, go and get to the good stuff. You want to get to the fireworks. Yeah. You know, it's never the worst idea in the world to cut out the first half of the book for, like, getting to the fireworks factory. So, either way, whether they're arrested by an accident, whether they're arrested on purpose, whether they're arrested in possession of loot, there is really one story here. A little spoiler alert for a future section. And that is a flippin' prison break.
I mean, come on.
That's the pitch. That's the sell. That's the point of doing this domain. It's like you do Sire 1313 because you want to do an awesome spooky train ride. You do this because you want to do a prison break. Prison break, baby.
A PG-rated prison break.
The prison break part of the story writes itself, as we've kind of said several times, as we've given, like, a couple of live on, like, there's so much. The structure is perfect for PC planning. There's so many different angles to approach this from to appeal to different sets of PC skills. There's a couple of, like, obvious steps, even just like, okay, if we want to do the break, we have to get access to the quartermaster, get our gear back, and then we got to figure out about the food and water situation, and it writes itself. But thing about Holes is it's got a really good story.
Yes.
The story that we've mentioned about Kate Barlow the Outlaw, about the warden's grandfather, about this curse. It's a really cool story that our main character, Stanley, kind of discovers sort of organically as he's in this prison. But
the problem with it is that we can't even say, oh, your PCs can discover it the same way that Stanley discovers it, because the way that Stanley discovers it is that he also has a backstory linked to it, which your PCs probably aren't going to. So that was a tough nut to crack.
If you have PCs with kind of mysteries and question marks in their backstory, this might be a fun way to make them a full Stanley, 100% Stanley Yelnats. 100% Shia LaBeouf. Introducing Shia LaBeouf, as the credits said.
Their great-grandmother is Eartha Kitt. Yes. It can be zero.
And so it's possible, but once again, unlikely. So the hardest nut to crack was, as you were saying, how do you engage that backstory? How do you make it be the PC's totally practical priority, an obvious priority, is escaping. And that escaping organically engages with the backstory of Green Lake.
Yeah. So a big part of that was the thing that we already said, that you kind of get your ticket out of the borders if you have a piece of the crust.
Yes. That was a brilliant insight, love.
Was that me?
I didn't think that was you, yeah.
Go me. I know the other one was me. I didn't know that was me. I think it was you. Yeah. So, you know, again, we keep talking about Stanley and how Stanley escapes and everything. So we're imagining that actually has happened in the past of the movie. That, again, we mentioned that in the movie, Kate Barlow just has this one cache of treasure.
Yes.
And they find it at the end, and they win, and they go. Since we were saying that she has multiple small caches buried everywhere, we can actually have had the movie more or less happen, but there's still a ton more treasure out there to be tormenting the warden.
And in the movie, like, the way everything, it's so good, everything clicks together, and Stanley finding the treasure also leads to the warden's downfall.
Yeah.
But that's not going to work in our situation. So in our version, it's just he found a cache of treasure and successfully escaped. Like, he and Zero escaped.
Yeah.
But Camp Green Lake's still just chugging along. And the rest of D10's still there.
But because Stanley cares about D10s and he wants to make sure that they can't escape, he did send a letter. But it was kind of garbled because he was having heat exhaustion and dehydration. We're kind of combining what went on with Stanley, if you've read it, with what happened with his grandfather or great-grandfather, whoever it was who got robbed by Kate Barlow and found refuge on God's thumb, and, like, he had all these really garbled memories of it because he was, this close to dying of heat exhaustion. So Stanley sent him this letter basically saying, that he'd escaped, that he'd found treasure, which they don't even know, like, is this literal or figurative treasure?
The treasure friendship.
Yes. The real treasure was the friendship.
The real treasure is the friends we named.
The real treasure is Zero.
Is friendship.
Like, maybe something about finding refuge on God's thumb. So kind of how much and how lucid you want the letter to be will kind of depend on how much your PCs enjoy picking apart these mysteries, and you know how much you need to handle.
Yeah. It's just need to be like, hey guys, do this to escape.
Yeah.
So that was best for your PC group.
Yes. But this is regardless, this will be a thing to get them started. Let them know that escape is possible, and that as far as anyone knows, Stanley's the only one who's ever done it.
And the nice thing is we got a couple of ways, like we mentioned, the great thing is this setting gives us multiple kind of skill paths in, and it could be social stuff of talking to people in D10s, and this whole, like, how much they're willing to tell you, how much they remember, is like how well you're doing on your social stuff to befriend, and like even different members of the group remembering different parts of the letter. You might even have like, no, didn't say that, said this. And the other possibility could say even, they got just a look at it because the warden confiscated it. So in other words, she heard something about treasure, so it's in her papers. So that can give you that nice stealth, or maybe you're the cook. You use those. You never thought those chef's utensil proficiency would be so useful, but you have that tense. She goes to take care. You create a distraction, and the cook sneaks into her study and starts rifling through the papers. In
which case, it lucidly spells out everything because the challenge isn't puzzling it out. The challenge is getting into the warden's house and getting it.
And in this process, you can also get clues to the wider backstory. Like, that's your big clue. That's your core clue. Because that's the one that's like, here's how you escape. And here's how you find treasure. But to kind of maybe understand it, or as you're researching, trying to find what Stanley found, you are getting other clues. So once again, might be talking to inmates, might be making knowledge checks. If someone mentions kissing Kate Barlow, like, oh yeah, Stanley would always talk about this like crazy outlaw, like make a history check. Like, this is what you remember about kissing Kate Barlow. You have more of the papers, you looking through the warden's papers with that chef's utensils proficiency. And maybe this is built in the ghost town, so the great thing is maybe you find like some old books or papers, you like, are going to a storage shed that was the old schoolhouse, and you a little panel opens and you find a journal, or you find some old newspapers bundled up in this abandoned schoolhouse.
Yeah.
And the great thing is, we have a wonderful Dungeons & Dragons-y way of getting some of that backstory.
Yes, we do. This one I remember was all.
Yeah, this is all you.
Because in Holes, they couldn't have literal ghosts.
They could not.
But this is Dungeons & Dragons, so we can have literal ghosts.
Right. It's the great thing. You just live in a world where it's not a surprise at all that, like, ghosts. Everyone just knows ghosts are real and part of life.
Yeah. And the great thing is, because you're missing out on a huge chunk of a whole story if you don't get the backstory, the full backstory. So you could even theoretically have that the PCs find out they need a piece of the treasure, and they're able to, do some kind of spell shenanigan, like locate object shenanigans to find the treasure, grab a piece and run, and they don't get to engage in the backstory at all. But no, because kissing Kate Barlow's ghost is guarding her treasure, because she thinks you're working for the warden, and she's not going to let you touch it, and it's not until you can prove to her that you know who she is, and that you are on her side, and that you think that she and her boyfriend got done wrong by Warden Walker's grandfather, that's when she's going to allow you to have the treasure and escape.
Yeah, it's so good, because you can just have this. You can have this ghost, and you can get any more of the backstory from her you haven't gotten already. Or you can use that backstory research to, like, persuade the ghost that you're fundamentally on her side. And this is kind of getting into some of those, like, encounters you might have. Even in holes, there already is this idea of the desert's very dangerous. It's got scorpions, it's got rattlesnakes, it's got these super lethal yellow spotted lizards.
Yeah, if you were wondering when we were going to mention the yellow spotted lizards. Yeah.
And the great thing is we can also bring in stuff like, we can bring in, there's ghosts, maybe there's this kind of elemental, there's like dust methods, dust devils, that fits the vibe, honestly, if there were like sandstorms. Skeletons, you can never go wrong with skeletons. You can never go wrong with skeletons. You can never go wrong with you're trying to find the treasure, and then skeletons of former treasure hunters or inmates are rising up out of the holes, because it's surrounded by holes.
Yeah, we'll talk about this more in Aging Up.
Yeah.
But there's all this stuff about how you can try to escape, but you're never going to make it because it's just miles of dry land all around. And, we never, hear about anybody who actually tried that. And didn't. But, presumably it would happen a lot. Or, there was an inmate who got bitten by a rattlesnake, and he went to the hospital. But, that's not always going to be the case.
Yeah. And once again, our sort of grimmer, darker, more adult version, they maybe aren't going to go to the trouble of sending him to the hospital.
So there are going to be a lot of restless dead in the desert surrounding the camp. Oh yeah, and then the other possibility that we have is, and this could be fun for a red herring.
Yes.
Is that the warden's grandfather, Trout Walker, his ghost is also out there, because boy howdy does he have unfinished business.
Yeah.
And he did not get a proper burial.
He did not.
So he's, and if you think about it, he did have unrequited love in a nasty way. So he's also going to be coming after people. He's going to be, attacking them to hoard the treasure and whatnot, and, to try to stop them from getting it. And that could be a nice red herring of, if you kind of find out that this is Kate Barlow's treasure and people are dying if they come too close to it, that at first you think that it's Kate's ghost, that she's killing to protect her treasure, but it's actually his. And kind of getting involved in this ghost story, pitting the two ghosts together, and, finding out that, no, one of them is a friendly ghost and the other isn't. That could be fun.
It could also be a nice, if the warden's coming after you, but you're able to, trick her into going where you've encountered his ghost, and then you get your classic, the ghost chases her off and you can make your escape. You just a classic play the field, trick the murderer into going to the haunted house, and the ghost deals with them, and then you get to make your escape.
Oh yeah, I love that.
So yeah, this is really the most difficult part, but I think most rewarding adventure is taking one of these ways of finding out the backstory and kind of incorporating it as necessary steps in finding the treasure and escaping, because the backstory is so good and so interesting, and this is going to be a really much more fun, much more interesting adventure if you can not just have it be a straight prison break.
Yeah.
But a straight prison break that is also a ghost story. So we'll talk about the different groups you might be doing these prison break ghost stories for.
Speaking of making it grittier,
in a section we like to call Dread Possibilities.
In our Dread Possibilities, there's always two things we talk about, which is aging down and aging up. Maybe you were running this for your 11-year-olds who read holes in middle school and they love holes, or they watch holes and they love holes, or even just they might not even know holes, but you want to run a prison break for kids.
Yes.
And kids are going to be all over that.
Oh yeah.
Or, on the flip side, once again, maybe you're running a prison break for adults, want to get into some of this grittier stuff.
Yeah, a little more Oz.
A
little less Shia LaBeouf, introducing Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah. So, Tom, how would you run this for tweens?
Well, as with many things, I have the easy part, because it's just do the book.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about some of the alternate ways of making it a little darker, a little more serious, and just don't do any of those. So, no, there's not dead prisoners. No, there's not, bodies of prisoners in the holes. The prisoners, they're mean in a PG way. Maybe there'll be one or two bullies, but it's not a prison gang getting shanked kind of thing. It's just a big mean guy might beat you up.
Yeah, it's basically high school plus.
Yeah. And that, detent, they might be a little rough around the edges, a little hostile at first, but they'll accept you pretty quickly, and they basically have a heart of gold. X-Ray's a little shady, but even in the end you get that he's like basically a good kid.
Yeah.
And he's not like a malicious or evil person. He was just kind of selfish, kind of shady. And like that like the main NPCs that they spend a lot of time with, and most of the NPCs in the camp are going to be basically like okay guys. And like maybe a little mean, a little rough, but basically okay. And like even the guards, you know, they did a very good job. The main guard they interact with, they call him Mr. Sir. And he's like, he is a bit of a jerk and a bit of a sadist, but it's in a very PG way.
It's very silly.
It's very silly. And he's like such a goofball. And so it's that really nice, he clearly is this sort of sadistic authority figure, bullying, abusive authority figure, but in a very silly PG way.
Or the same with Dr. Pendancy.
Yeah.
It's like, he's a bully, but the main way that he's a bully is he picks this one kid, Zero, from D10, and for whatever reason, he just has it out for Zero.
Yeah.
And so he's just constantly putting Zero down and like making fun of him and belittling him in front of the other kids. And that's such a mean teacher thing.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's going to get your kids to hate him for sure. But it's not a thing that they're not going to be able to see.
Yeah, and it might not be like it's not personal on them. If you pick an NPC.
Yeah. You don't want to do that to them. But have them go, especially an NPC they like, because again, Zero is like, you know, the character who's closest to Stanley. So like, have them go after their favorite NPC, and oh man, the things they will do to Mr. Pendancy.
But what about if you are not running this for middle schoolers who love holes or just want to do a prison break story? What if you were doing this for adults that have a quite more of a familiarity with adult-oriented prison stories?
Yeah, we've managed to avoid doing a skip ahead warning the past couple episodes. I think we're going to continue managing that, but future Rachel might come in and correct me in a minute. Because we can be pretty vague. You know a lot of the tropes, so like we don't have to spell them out. The big one is do the opposite of all that.
Yep.
As always, aging up is the opposite of aging down. It's like all of the negotiating the different tents and your place within the tent. It's life and death, cutthroat scum and villainy politics.
Yes.
Like maybe there's one person in your tent who's like your ally and who you can trust, and everybody else is turning on you. Maybe you think that there's a guy that you can trust, and then he turns you in for an afternoon off.
Yeah.
Like so, there's just making everyone just a lot nastier, even like a lot more like. If they catch you talking to somebody in B tent, they're going to beat you down because you do not talk to anybody outside of your tent. On the flip side of you get the one who you think is your friend and he turns you in. Maybe you get one who is really helpful and they will help you, but they ain't doing it for free.
Yeah.
What are you going to have to do to get his help? That could get interesting. There's also, you could get into some really interesting stuff here, because once again, these are all nonviolent defenders. You could get into some really interesting stuff about how, they were nonviolent defenders when they came in. Prison sucks. Prison is like... the American prison system is designed to create recidivists. I'm just saying. So you could have it be that, they were nonviolent defenders when they came in. They aren't anymore. They will have their sob story about how they didn't do nothing wrong when they came in. And maybe it's even true, but that's not who they are anymore. And maybe you can find that person again, but... It's going to be difficult because they've fallen so hard. And that could be really great for the right party, actually. The whole, doing a redemption story with someone who was a good person and has been brought so low and turned their back on that, and bring them back around to find themselves again. That is the kind of story that some players, including me, that you can tell I'm getting passionate here. I would eat that up with a spoon. But you can't have them get that dark with kids. That's much more of an aging up thing.
Sidebar, speaking of kids, Holes, it is both the book and the movie, I think it is incredibly impressive that it is very kid-friendly. It soft pedals a lot of this, but is a great way of, introducing concepts and starting conversations with kids about the idea of the justice system, the idea of corruption, the idea of abuse, the idea of the prison industrial complex. It's handled so well, and it is such a good way to do this in a not disturbing. You don't watch Orange is the New Black with your 11-year-old. This is, or Oz or whatever, but you want to sort of talk about these issues or even just start a conversation. This is a fantastic way to do that in a very kid not scary or disturbing, but like very present way. Like you don't read this book and come away and go, wow, the justice system's wonderful.
Yeah.
Everybody should go to Camp Green Lake. It'll make them a good person. All bad children should dig holes.
Some good children. You know, there can be, like, real violence, not just the bullies roughing you up. There can, you know, we're talking about people getting shanked. There can be some of that, like, threats of real violence. Guards being real bad. We'll just skate right by that, but you know the kind of form it can take.
Just a lot more casual violence from the guards.
Yeah, casual violence, casual cruelty, like just withholding privileges just for funsies. And you do see some of that with Mr. Sir in the movie. You see him like denying Stanley water because Stanley embarrassed him. But you could get you could get even deeper with that if you wanted to. And then there is. At one point with Zero, he, like, runs off, and they're saying, okay, well, we're just gonna say that he, escaped and he died out in the desert, and then later he comes back, and they're like, well, no, you know what, never mind, we're gonna just make him disappear and still... That's our story, we're sticking to it.
We sort of already destroyed his file, and, like, sort of we already could have declared him dead, and we can't admit that we were lying.
Yeah. So a lot more of problem prisoners, you can't see the air quotes I'm doing, but I'm doing big finger quotes, tried to escape and never came back.
Yeah, it's the great thing. You just, they tried to escape. They ran off into the desert, and who knows what happened to them there. And there's a whole lot of holes around.
Yep,
there's a whole lot of dangers in the desert.
Yeah, the warden already knows what area they've dug up and don't need to dug again. So if, it's a 5x5x5 grave, then well, okay.
There you go, then.
Oh, I do want to say real quick, if you're obviously because your PCs presumably aren't children, but obviously if you're doing all this aging up stuff, and probably in general, adults, they're not kids, please, I'm begging you.
Yes, this is not a juvenile.
Yes. Just in case you think we're monsters, no, we're saying all this envisioning this is an adult facility, I just realized.
No, that's an important clarification. Like, it seems self-evident to us, but just in case it isn't.
Yeah, because presumably the PCs aren't 12-years. They've been doing in a camp for 12-year-olds. But...
Whereas, once again, with the younger players, this could even be still the juvenile detention center.
Or it could be the adult detention center, because, again, the kids don't want to play as kids.
So, we've given you a setting for a really cool prison break story that has potential to also be connected to a really cool sort of ghost story. And we've given you a whole range of possibilities of the different groups, age levels, maturity levels, content levels you want to do that prison/ghost story with. And we will wrap up our discussion of this such a perfect domain and give you our parting thoughts in a section we like to call
Parting Thoughts.
First thing we like to do in this parting thoughts section is talk about the genres of horror for this setting. This is from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. They define the genres of horror. They talk about the signifiers, talk about the type of horror story you get there. It's a super good section.
Best part of the whole book.
It's so good. And so we like to take that and apply them to the domains we come up with. This one, there's, I think, a real obvious choice. And then you do have a couple of possibilities, but...
For me, there were 3, but I felt like 2 were much stronger than
me
the
too,
other one.
Me too. So I think the first, we've said the word a couple of times already. This is a ghost story.
This is a ghost story.
This is a story of ghosts. You're going to encounter ghosts. We really see a lot of versions of this story. You run into the ghost of Kate Barlow or Sam or Trout Walker or somebody. And even that it's the whole that you're sort of like caught in this figuring out what happened. That getting out of this place and kind of being free from this domain are all about unraveling Kate Barlow's fate.
Yeah. And even the book and the movie, they're more realistic fiction, but they're figurative ghost stories.
Yes.
We've turned it into a literal ghost story, but figuratively.
Right, yeah. Story. Yes. And the other one I was thinking, speaking of figuring out the past, was Gothic.
Yeah. Speaking of figurative ghost stories.
Figurative ghost stories, the Gothic, yes.
Haunted by the past, family curses, generational,
a place that externally is the manifestation of the past into the present, is the kind of interior life. You could do something interesting with the warden as a kind of Gothic villain of this kind of corrupter. Someone who does, take people and corrupts them and brings them into this system and kind of corrupts them with the past. It's interesting, this isn't a lot of the traditional aesthetic signifiers of the Gothic.
Right.
So it's not like your cobwebbed mansions and your crumbling houses of ushers, but it like sort of is.
It's kind of cool. It's like an American Southwest Gothic. That it's the desert and the whole that it hasn't rained since since Trout Walker whipped up this mob. And, yeah, just
you're in the sort of blasted ruins of the moral corruption became physical corruption. The moral, like, deadness and sin became physical deadness, and you're sort of in the ruins of that. And even the idea of, like, the ghost town as a sort of south. You have, like, I'm aware of, you have your New England Gothic, and you've got your Southern Gothic, which also has very specific aesthetic signifiers. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to Google this later, if there is a kind of southwestern Gothic of the kind of ghost town in the middle of the desert, and the sort of sparseness and deadness of the desert as the manifestation of the moral corruption.
That would be. I feel like it would get lumped in with a bunch of Weird Wild West stuff. But yeah, that's really cool. And that even in the book, we said it's mostly realistic fiction, but the one very strong speculative element that it absolutely does have is curses.
Right, curses.
There are 3 separate curses that actually happen.
And they all come together. And once again, curses, classic Gothic element. It's hard to get more, other than a cobwebbed mansion.
Yes.
It's hard to get more Gothic than a family curse.
Yes.
And they're even specifically family curses.
Yes.
It's not the Stanley did something bad and got cursed. It's that he has inherited this curse.
Yeah, it's the past reaching into the present.
The past reaching into the present. Yeah, it's the family. Yelnat's family is cursed, and he has to unravel the story of that curse to save his family. That's really good.
Yeah. And even the whole that Trout Walker was the one who is specifically cursed, and the warden has kind of chosen to be cursed. Yes. That that she she could walk away, but she isn't.
So what was the third one you were thinking of?
Disaster horror.
Yes. Yeah. This is kind of it's a sort of little mini Department of Corrections post-apocalyptic setting.
Yeah, that kind of the form that the curse, the first of the 3 curses takes, is this, this drought, no rain, blasted desert hellscape, disaster horror kind of thing. But that's kind of like a subset of the Gothic horror. And
you've even got, you can look at this as a sort of post-apocalyptic, you have the warlord with the water supply. You have Morton Ward Morton Joe is using control of that water supply to sort of control this community, and has kind of all the power, and everyone has to obey.
Do not let yourselves grow addicted to water.
But the big difference, I think, is this whole, no, this is just this one bad, zone. And if you could get out of here, if you could escape the Green Lake, this desert, you're, back in the regular world, so to speak. So that's a really good call. But definitely for the write-up, it's going to be Gothic, and as so often happens, Gothic and ghost story.
What were you thinking for the third?
What was I thinking for the third? Oh, I was thinking if you really wanted to do the aging up and play into the prison environment, there could be something with psychological horror. Play into the surveillance, play into the you never know when you're going to get sold out for a pack of cigarettes, you never know who you can trust. Every relationship is sort of transactional. And you could do a psychological horror, but that's a very different story in this setting. We'll get into that
in about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. But I think definitely the strongest contenders are 1, 2 with a bullet, ghost story, Gothic.
100%, yes.
So then we talk about what kind of game, and we've tipped our hands on this a little bit, as you might in a poker game in the rec room, playing for shower tokens at Camp Green Lake. And some domains are good for really long-term campaigns, months and months and months, years and years and years, like your Curse of Strahd and Barovia. Others are more there's one specific adventure. So, yeah, thank you.
Dominia, the Insane Asylum.
Yeah, the Insane Asylum domain.
You're gonna go there and you're gonna have a creepy Insane Asylum adventure. And I don't know, maybe be trapped in the Insane Asylum as patients and have to break out.
Right, yeah.
That's the only story you have.
You don't have years of roleplay in Dominia. And speaking of trapped at a breakout, I'd say, as we said, we tipped our hand a bit. This is a one shot. This is a one arc. There's a one story you really do in Camp Green Lake, and it's an awesome story.
Yes.
Because much like Dominia, it's a prison break.
And so, yeah, you go, you're brought in, you're arrested for whatever, you have to, go out there and dig, and then as you do, you're discovering the story of Sam and Kate and the curse.
Yeah.
And then you escape.
Yeah, that's the arc. That's part 1, part 2, part 3.
Yeah.
You can make this shorter or longer. Like, there's a version of this that is, like, literally a one-shot where the PCs are there for 48 hours, basically.
Yeah.
If you have extremely proactive PCs, which some of us do sometimes.
Yeah.
There are longer versions. Like, you could do a really slow burn, like, multiple sessions, like, really getting into the prison politics and the web of relationships, and, like, really slowly, like, piece by piece, assembling your escape plan, and, like, having twists and turns. But it's gonna end the same way.
Yeah.
Much like Dominia. And speaking of Dominia, are there any, Rachel, potentially older material you could connect this or incorporate this with?
You could, in fact, connect this to Dominion.
What?
So this is jumping back to, it was less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Significantly less than 10 minutes. Jumping back to if you really want to play up the psychological horror aspect, this is one of those incorporating the older material sections where I am delighted to tell you that you can get this on DM's Guild.
Put more 3E stuff there.
Yeah, this is 2E.
That's what I'm saying. Put more 3E stuff.
Yes, put more 3E stuff, please, because I'm always recommending 3. And yeah.
You find it on Amazon, I guess.
Yeah, I guess
for
so.
$100.
Yeah, it's probably a rights thing as a white wolf.
Probably.
Anyway, so Bleak House, the Death of Rudolf Van Richten mod. The first part of that, the whole thing was that, like, his enemies had kind of conspired to get him committed to the insane asylum in Dominia to kind of, like, start the process of breaking his spirit. And so you end up there, and you end up trapped in the asylum with Van Richten, and you guys all do a prison break together. And they were going much more...
Oh boy, were they.
Yeah. I've run this for Tom, so he knows. It was much more of the psychological horror. They were specifically pulling a lot from The Prisoner. And so if you really want to turn this into just this paranoid psychological horror hellscape, then the first part of Bleak House has some great ideas for you. Like Session Zero it, because it's very extreme. And it's one of those that I really appreciate that they even had at the beginning, like, this is going to be a tough pill for your PCs to swallow, because it's going to involve a lot of disempowerment, which second edition wasn't always cognizant of this, so I really appreciate them doing that. But yeah, there's from a GM perspective, I've run Bleak House twice, and the Insane Asylum stretch just made a major impression on my PCs both times. And if you can incorporate some of those elements of just the factions and the always being watched and the being constantly at the risk of being turned in and the dehumanization, there's a lot of good stuff there.
And I'm going to address this as a player and kind of flip it around. And the next thing, and this is also an excellent segue into the next section we like to do, which is the strengths and challenges. And so yeah, I was a player in this, and it is a lot. It is intense. It is a real, like, emotional ringer. So the nice thing is, you've got that on one end of this dial, and you've got, like, our aging down holds the book / movie on the other end of the slider, and that gives you a slider.
Yeah.
So you could take either of these elements and move them more to the other story. You could take elements of that Dominia story if you wanted to be like, I'm running Camp Green, like I'm running this whole setting, but I want to be real intense, real emotional ringer. And you could go the other way as well. If you're like, I want to run Bleak House, I don't want to punch my players in the throat over and over again.
Yeah.
Then, like, maybe Van Richten could be in a Camp Green Lake.
Yeah.
And so you could still do that kind of rescuing him, and he's kind of weak, he's kind of brain fried from being in the digging, and just, there's a little bit of psychological torment. You can kill off kind of the weakened, woozy Van Richten. But then you can just seg right into the next part of the Bleak House.
Yeah, that's if you want to run Bleak House, but you've got either people who really are not comfortable with that level of psychological intensity, or again, maybe you're running it for like your kids.
Because it's very much, and once again, it's so much that even back in the second edition days, they were like, "Is this too much?
This is a
we
lot."
Should probably check
Dr. Heinfroth is the Dark Lord of Dominia, and, like, to this day, anyone who has ever been in either of my Bleak House games, if I slip in a reference to Dr. Heinfroth in a later game, they kind of go, yeah. Like, there was an Easter egg involving Dr. Heinfroth in the game I'm currently running, and Tom hasn't played this in, like, 20 years, and he still had the little...
It's like, even in the AD&D 2nd edition days, they were like, wow, there should be almost a session before session 1 about this is so intense, where you make sure everyone is like up
on board
with this particularly emotionally intense, very dark, very psychological role-playing. If only we had a name for that kind of thing.
Only we had a name for that.
But yeah, so if you like, I really like this story, Bleak House, and it's a good story. It's great.
It is.
Oh,
I wouldn't have run it twice if it weren't great.
Yeah, like, sidebar, if you want a good kind of return sequel, if you do Curse of Strahd, and you want to do a return in a sense of this being like a finale, Bleak House was one of the last ones they did for the AD&D for the 2nd edition, and it was kind of the finale. Mm-hmm. Like, it was meant to sort of be the series finale of 2nd edition AD&D Ravenloft, before, right when they were, like, getting bought by WotC.
Yeah.
So, like, if you wanted... like, okay, we had Curse of Strahd, and I want to return, I want a very much, like, sense of, like, finality, then you absolutely could adapt Bleak House with a couple of tweaks.
It's so good.
Anyway, so the strength here, and that's segue, the strength is that prison breaks are awesome and cool.
Yes.
But that can be very frustrating for PCs to, like, be captured, to be prisoners, either... It's one thing if they like, well, we're going in to bust someone out, but if you want to do this as their shenanigans, catch up with them. And that can be not fun, and being prisoners can be not fun, but you have to be prisoners to do a prison break. So unfortunately, that's basic logic. So this is a fantastic setting for a prison break story that's not going to be super unfun.
Yeah. That,
like, even we mentioned, you have this wonderful setup of the first part of the day, you're digging the holes, and that's unmonitored. And then the second, once you're done your hole, you have the rest of the day for free time. So that, like, gives you that kind of space to wander around and steal, small bits of metal for the rogue to use as lockpicks, and try and charm the supply tent guy to, like, get access, or work on, try and find a way to show off your cooking to the warden, to, like, get that guy on the inside to rifle through her papers, and just... It's a fantastic narrative structure for a prison break story.
And, like, with the whole that it's not going to be as brutal and everything, and that you can dial it down. With what we were just talking about with Bleak House, this is something, again, that they've been struggling with and, trying to figure out how to do in a way that works for all groups in 2nd edition. But, like, even now in 5e, the main prison domain that we have is Sarania. Mm-hmm. And... because it wasn't previously a prison, and in the older stuff it was a plantation. So I mean, I can see why they didn't want. Want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Like, it's still
write your own horror book game. Put it on DM's Guild.
But then whether you're going with the plantation or the prison, the brutality and cruelty of the person running it to the people in his power is the main point of the setting, and that's not the main point of Camp Green Lake.
Yes. And it's great, like, you could have the idea, the sort of suggestion of brutality, suggestion of abuse, but your players aren't being, like, beaten.
Yeah.
They don't have guards that are, like, throwing them on the ground and beating them. Yeah. It's just Mr. Sir being a jerk to them.
Mm-hmm. And if your players are really into that kind of intense role-play and they eat that up with a spoon, then you can do that, but you don't have to.
You don't have to. The whole gives you a way to do this prison story in the most fun way possible. Mm-hmm. And also what I love, it's not just the prison break. You have this ghost story. You have the learning Kate Barlow's story, and we've kind of tried to make that an essential element of the prison break. It's not just, let's get food, let's get water, let's get our spell components, and then we're make for the hills, and haha, we're free. Sort of the essential part of the escape is learning Kate Barlow's story, and kind of taking a step to appease her spirit. Mm-hmm. And also, speaking of Kate Barlow's story and appeasing her spirit, you get some treasure out of it.
Yeah.
So you can actually, like, your PCs can come out of this prison break with treasure and magic items they didn't have when they went in, and that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
Once again, going to remove a lot of the, well, we did all this crazy prison break stuff, and we're back where we started.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, they can, like, get loot out of the prison break if they appease Kate Barlow's ghost and get, like, a treasure cache.
Yeah, and even, like, if they're not able to get their stuff from the quartermasters, who can, like, scale the treasure cache they find accordingly. It's like, oh, you didn't get your stuff back. That's good. Look how much stuff you found. You found so much stuff.
You can buy a dozen suits of plate mail with the loot you found in this chest. With there's diamonds you found in the chest.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good here, and especially I think this is the perfect setting for doing a prison break story with a very, very, very variable slider of how dark and intense you want it to be. And that's always great to have.
Yes.
What about some of the challenges?
Well, one of the challenges, again, kind of getting into the whole, like, disempowerment PC shenanigans thing, it is going to be really tricky. Your PCs have to be willing to play along to some extent.
Yes,
They can't just be murder hoboing their way through.
Yes.
Because, they might be having the time of their lives, but that's not going to be a fun experience for you as a GM. Even if you're wanting to run a wacky prison break full of shenanigans, they have to be prisoners at some point.
Yeah.
And they can't just, like, automatically be stomping all over everyone. So there's kind of that negotiating.
Yeah.
The level of how much disempowerment, how much murder hoboing, how much playing along, etc. Kind of on a related note, if they're murder hoboing around, it might be hard to get the backstory. The backstory is so important. And, they might... If your players don't get the story that's being told here and are being a little slow on the uptake, they might feel railroaded. If, the ghost of Kate Barlow keeps appearing and chasing them back to the camp, they might not realize what you're doing. Even if you feel like you're pointing giant neon signs for all the clues, PCs can be like that sometimes. It happens. So that could be a source of frustration. Part of what makes Holes work so well, and we've referred to this a couple times, part of the Holes experience is that amazing, like, Swiss watch, all of the character backstories coming together, and you're not going to get that with, the random PCs you put into this story. Like, again, if you're really, really, really lucky and you have a PC whose backstory involves a mysterious family curse and being robbed by an outlaw, then you can have him full on be a Stanley.
That's the ideal play experience for this story, is basically a full Stanley.
Yeah.
There's at least one or more PCs that have big blank spaces that they're willing to let you, like, put in your hands that you can tie into the story of Kate Barlow.
Yeah. But otherwise, you're going to get a fun prison break, you're going to get a fun Gothic Ghost Story prison break, but it's not going to be that full Holes experience. And then, a thing that actually we haven't touched on yet at all, is, speaking of Saranya originally being a PlayStation, is what to do with the character Sam, who I don't think we've even mentioned by name yet because we glossed over Kate Barlow's backstory so quickly. But basically, in the book and the movie, it was like the Old West times. Kate Barlow, like, Trout Walker was coming on to her, but she wasn't interested in him, and there was this black man named Sam, and they fell in love. And then, like, Trout Walker saw them kissing, and it was illegal for a black man to kiss a white woman, and so Trout Walker, whipped up a mob, and
like, he was jealous.
He was jealous, and he whipped up a mob, and things were bad. And that might not be a thing that your PCs want to touch with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
So, if you want to bring in, like, a fantasy racism element, like, that maybe have it that Sam was Vistani, that Sam was a half-orc. Tom, you had the idea that it could just be a class thing.
It could be a class thing. Could have been that, like, Trout Walker was just jealous that Kate, maybe Kate was like a minor noble or sort of like very, very like well-off commoner, kind of like middle-classy. And Trout Walker, part of the sort of sense of possessiveness is, well, I'm a noble, so I get to have her, and she's kissing a commoner. This guy who's like a laborer and a peddler and a commoner, and she falls in love with that instead. And you can still get, this is a really horrible thing that this angry mob did. This is this horrible man's horrible possessive jealousy, but you don't have to bring in race or a specific, like, racial reason for the murder if that's not going to be fun for you.
Yeah, you could even have the, like, if it's a class thing or just kind of like a Sam's the Town oddball or something like that, you could have it be that, like, there was some weird trumped-up charge. That it wasn't even specifically him kissing Kate that was the issue. That, like, everyone knew it was nonsense. But they went along with it because they didn't like Sam.
Like, Trout claimed that Sam stole something from him.
Exactly,
and whipped up a mob. And it was, everyone knew what he was really about, but that was the paperwork charges.
Yeah. And
the
that
angry mob paperwork charges.
That lets you even have it be, again, if you wanted to be that Sam and Kate are both commoners, so then why is it a problem for Sam to be kissing Kate? No, it's because, Trout's, done this whole thing. So, kind of like, as often happens with this, and as was, like, going back to what we were talking about with Princess and the Frog and some other works that have touched on this kind of thing, if your players are familiar with the source material and you take this element out, they might feel like you're kind of watering it down, not telling stories that need to be told, all that kind of thing. On the other hand, the reason that you water things down is if they're too spicy.
Yeah.
So, you know your party,
well, it's going to be fun for everybody.
Yep. As always, as Bleak House told us.
Right.
Session 0.
Session before the first session. So, before we rejoin our narrator and find out what less dry and deserty, quite the opposite of that,
much more water,
place she is going to next, and this one is the one that unequivocally fits our name of Summer Blockbuster.
I think it's the only blockbuster
one, yes.
in the bunch, yeah.
Holes did pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
It was a perfectly respectable...
Blockbuster is a strong word.
No blocks were busted.
And spoilers for August, it was a flop.
A flop, yes.
But
huge flop.
Next month, Blockbuster.
Blockbuster in my heart.
Yeah.
So, what actual... bust in the block, mega non-desert she's going to next. If you want to tell us about what you decided to do with Holes, if you are one of those people who oh my gosh, I have a mysterious backstory for my PC. Thank you. This is perfect. How can they contact us?
Or if, one of the recent people who contacted us, you saw Wish as an in-flight movie and were like, this movie is terrible, but Magnifico, big and great Darklord, and you want to tell us all about it. That made our day. That was great.
Yeah. if you got a hot take on Wish's domain, fire away.
Because otherwise we watched it for no reason, guys.
Right.
Anyway, so if you want to do that, then you can email us at wonderfulworldofdarklords@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook or Tumblr at Wonderful World of Darklords. And you can also find us on Patreon at Wonderful World of Darklords. So all of those places. We do allow free members on Patreon, by the way. So you can just go, you can become a free member. We won't ask you for money, and then you get updates there whenever we post something. So,
if you like how we took this and eventually mix it with Bleak House and made a very brutal psychological version of Holes with Stanley Yelnats, then I have a couple of horror movies that I've adapted into adventures on DM's Guild. You can just look for Tom Kohler, or you can follow the link for the free domain right up for this domain and more by this author. And if you like our sensitivity to maybe taking Bleak House and making it more fun for a younger group of people that want to see Van Richten again, we also have some resources for running more spooky horror things for younger players. Maybe you want to run Curse of Strahd for your younger group. I do have a resource for doing that.
Strahd gives me goosebumps.
And then you could go and do a Bleak House for gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. Oh man, Bleak House gives me goosebumps. Don't threaten me with a good time. And then speaking of younger people, I have a picture book, Mother Ghost, Nursery Rhymes for Little Monsters. It's exactly what it sounds like, 13 classic nursery rhymes written to be about Halloween. I also have several short stories for adults, which are available on my website, www.rachelkohler.com. Most of them are available there for free. Some of them aren't. I need to get working on that because nobody orders literary magazines anymore.
Until next time, thank you for listening, and happy gaming.
Parting thoughts. I attempted to take notes on what I experienced during my time in the desert, but between heat and thirst, I am embarrassed to admit that I have little beyond delirious ramblings. I've attached these ramblings here, on the off chance that they contain any information of value. Something about Kate Barlow, a diet of nothing but onions, and finding refuge on Ezra's thumb? Apparently, Barlow herself gave me the gold coin that I have enclosed, although I am stymied as to how she thought a coin would help me survive in the desert. Perhaps she simply wanted to give it to someone other than the warden, who seems destined never to find this treasure. I have only vague memories of eating nothing but onions in the desert, but the bitter, acidic taste lingering in my mouth proves those recollections correct. As I hold the compass as a mist talisman, I look forward to traveling somewhere that I might find real food to drive that flavor out of my mouth. When I arrive there, the first thing I'm gonna do is eat a whole bushel of apples. Regards, D.
In the majority of circumstances, I would praise one's devotion to their family's legacy. In Walker's case, I have nothing but disdain. The use of petty criminals to perform such remedial labor is a traditional form of rehabilitation. However, such labor should allow the prisoners to accomplish tasks for the betterment of the region's economy, while ideally providing the criminal with a useful skill. Although gravediggers are plentiful in these misty realms, I see no need for this many, and those particular holes are traditionally 6 feet deep. Those driven solely by the pursuit of wealth are such narrow-minded, pitiful creatures. We saw this previously with Long John Silver, and now again in Walker. The foolishness of living such a harrowing existence, for merely the potential of excavating the untold fortunes of the infamous Kissing Gate Barlow, needs no commentary. Should Walker ever obtain her desire, I theorize it will amount to less than the funds she spent acquiring it. Naturally, she never will realize this herself, but it is a rare dreadlord that recognizes the futility of their own actions. Perhaps my servant might consider reframing from offering donations in my name in her future endeavors. Miss Walker and her little band of miscreant guards shall not receive a single coin from my realm. Indeed, the only thing I offer her is a magnanimous reminder of what happens to those that attempt to harm my favorite servants. I'm certain the yellow-spotted lizards and methods of Green Lake will be the least of her concern when she receives my kind message.
This has been The Wonderful World of Darklords. We have no affiliation with Disney or Wizards of the Coast. All music recordings used in this episode are in the public domain and were obtained through museopen.org. Titles and links are in the show notes. Dialogue for Yensid was written by Aslan Rex himself, who you can follow on Tumblr at Darklord Aslan. The Wonderful World of Darklords logo was designed by Haylight Jones. You can find links to their work in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show, look for us on patreon.com or find our tip jar on Red Circle. Thanks for listening.
We have a plan. We have the blueprint of the prison tattooed on her back. Like, who was Leonard Snurt again in Flash? What's his name?
Captain Cold?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The actor.
Oh, the actor. I was like, is this Captain Cold? Funny, obviously. Yeah, Leonard Snurt.
I know I'm gonna.
Yeah, as soon as you see
such a dumb amount of work to do for like a dumb reference to a show I've never seen. I used to know this.
Yeah.
Where's Miller? All right.
Yeah, it was a weird.
Yeah. No, we're like deliberately getting arrested because we want to get sent to this prison because we got the blueprint tattooed to our back like Wentworth Miller in Prison Break.
To avoid doing a skip ahead warning the past couple episodes, I think we're going to continue managing that, but future Rachel might come in and correct me in a minute. Because...
Hello, if you Rachel here, get shanked in the shower.
Dig, and then as you do, you're discovering the story of Sam and Kate. You're discovering the story of Sam and Kate and the curse.
Yeah.
Sounded like I was inhaled.
How did you do this whole thing?
In my letter of introduction, I had informed Warden Walker that my patron had expressed interest in making a sizable donation to Camp Green Lake, but desired a first-hand report of it first. In my letter of introduction, I had informed Warden Walker that my patron had expressed interest in making a sizable donation to Camp Green Lake, but desired a first-hand report of it beforehand. But that's 2 hands.